You know, I'll mention Rabbi Steinsaltz himself, but I remember that he once tried to teach us this concept of repentance, Teshuvah, during this month of Elul. He came to a yeshiva, and I remember him demonstrating what Teshuvah is all about. Because he asked for change, for fundamental change, or for fundamental return. And at one point, when we asked him, so what is Teshuvah? He had a cup of water next to him, and he took the cup of water and he spilled it on the floor. And he said, look, if there's one crack in this floor, let me just mute all so that everyone can hear. If there's one crack in this floor, then that water can seep in and eventually create more cracks and more cracks and more cracks until it can create canyons. And it can even create the Grand Canyon if you want, which is how I believe, right? The Grand Canyon was created. Now, in a way, all that is needed for Teshuvah to happen is to make that crack. And he asked us, just create a crack in you. Allow this opening for God. Just allow a little crack. Eventually, when you allow him to come in through your crack, whatever crack you'll be creating for him, that will create more cracks, and that will eventually transform you. And I think that in many ways, that is what Teshuvah is about. This is what this is speaking about. Yes, we can have a life of cracks. A life, it could be a very challenging pathway, this pathway of Teshuvah. But it starts really in a very simple way. This is what he's saying. It was just one little crack. Just let God in, just a little bit. And the more you let him in, the more those cracks will open, the more that transformation will occur, and the more you'll be able to really create canyons in the world and sites of beauty and of nourishment. That really is what is asked. Now, yes, some have it harder than others, not to create the crack. Everyone can do that and should do that. But after the crack is created, then Teshuvah is an ongoing process for them, and sometimes in the most minute details. Some people have challenges of growth. Every character is different. Every personality is different. For some people, for example, kindness comes to them very easily. And for some, it doesn't come to them easily. And they really need to fight with themselves and try to conquer that evil inclination each and every day. So depending on your personality and your character trait, it might come easily. That seeping of the water might come easily, and it might not. But it's certainly incumbent upon everyone to ensure that that water of God seeps in through our entire lives and our entire being to create those canyons eventually. You know, I'm reminded of Abraham. He was a man of kindness. Kindness came to him easily. His nature was the nature of kindness. He's known as Amud Chesed in Kabbalah, which means the pillar of kindness. To the point that the Midrash says that a character of kindness, Chesed itself, came to God and said, if Abraham is alive, I don't need to walk in the world. He's doing the work for me. That's the type of Chesed he was. Once Abraham died, then Chesed had to come back and work its magic in the world. But Abraham was the epitome of kindness, but that came to him naturally. But it's interesting to note that when Abraham was asked to go against his nature, only then did God come to him and say, now I know that you are with me. Now I know that you're connected, that you fear me. When was that? During his 10th test, right? For the first test, God didn't say, now I know. For the second, neither. For the third, neither. He waited until the 10th test. What was the 10th test of Abraham? It was a test of the binding of Isaac. God said to him, you know what, go take your own child that you love and go and sacrifice him to me. Of course, the sacrifice didn't happen. It was a test, as we know. But once Abraham did that, then God revealed himself through an angel to Abraham and said to him, now I know that you fear me. Now? You gave me 9 tests. Why now? And the answer is exactly what we're speaking about. For 9 tests, Abraham had to work with that which came to him naturally, with kindness. So maybe he didn't really do it for God. He did it because it's part of his personality. But once he had to go against his nature, against kindness, to sacrifice his son, that's the most opposing force to kindness. Once he did that and he showed to God that he can do that, then God said, oh, now I know you're not just doing it because it's your nature. Now I know that you're doing it because it's against your nature, because it's for me, because I asked you to do it. So now, now I know that you got fear. Some people have that challenge to go against their nature a lot, depending on the type of nature we have, depending on the tendencies you have, maybe on upbringing you have, or on all sorts of other influences, social maybe influences that you have. Some people, it's very hard. And that act of Teshuvah is therefore a lifelong act, because they have to fight demons upon demons upon demons each and every day. And no one is to blame them. No one knows what is in the psyche of the other. You know, there's a Hasidic saying that says that the only person you can judge is yourself. The others you can't, because you don't know what's happening inside, but you know what's happening within you. So you can judge yourself. So no one knows really what people have to go through in order to overcome, to do just one mitzvah that may come naturally to us, but for them it's a big deal. So we are not there to judge others, but we have to recognize the fact that for some people it's very hard. Maybe for us it's very hard. And God doesn't judge us by the amount of kindness we have, for example, like Abraham, but he judges us and our relationship with him by our ability to overcome each and every challenge, especially the ones that come unnaturally to us. That's really how we are measured by God. It's not how big or small the deed is, and it's not, again, how kind it is or how illuminating it is. It's really how much strength did I need? How much did I have to go within myself to find that resource that enables me to overcome this? You know, there's a great story about Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Berditchev, that Hasidic master who was called the advocate of Israel because he always judged people favorably. And one day, someone came to him and said, Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Berditchev, a student of yours, is somewhat 70 years old, and for 70 years he was so devout and so good, and all of a sudden he became a heretic. He left Judaism, left everything. Look at him. Look what happened to him. And Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Berditchev said, well, quite the opposite. I admire this man. You admire this man? He left everything. Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Berditchev said, yes, I admire this man because he had to withstand his evil inclination with such courage and strength for 70 years. Not only after 70 years, he got the better of it. But this man had superhuman strength to withstand those temptations for 7 years. So how dare we judge him like that? Let's judge him by the strength that he displayed each and every day. And it's true for many human beings, for many of us. And sometimes it's true not maybe in the context of life itself, of the whole lives that we have, but it's true for certain elements in our lives, for certain mitzvahs. Okay, for some people to be kind is very hard. For some people to control their anger, it's very hard. For some people not to steal, for example, is very hard. For some people to not say, to speak positively, to not say Lashon Hara, that's very hard. And they have to bite their tongue each time. But the more we can control ourselves and work in fighting that nature that might not be so positive, I think the more we can create those cracks that eventually build canyons and change this world and the world around us. And that's really what this is saying. Allow that crack, that's easy. That's simple for all. But then what happens after that, that's much harder. I'd love to hear your thoughts. I don't want this, as mentioned many times, I don't want this to be just a monologue. Now, if I may add, and then hopefully we can hear you also, I think that we mentioned this at the Soul class on Sunday, but I think it's one of the things that are really missing in our generation the most. We teach our children that bad exists on the outside. We have to fight racism and bigotry and sexism and you name it. And that's true. Bad exists on the outside. But unfortunately, we don't teach our children that bad exists in here. And that, no, you're not perfect. No, not every feeling is to be celebrated. I know a kindergarten teacher, and I mentioned this to her, and she semi-agreed with me, but that starts her day with her kindergartners saying to the children, let's hear what you are feeling today. And let's justify and rationalize and even celebrate every feeling that you may have. Now, what type of message does that give our children? every feeling is really a good one. No, we have to know that some feelings are negative, some are bad. We have in here a good inclination. We also have a bad inclination. Not every feeling needs to be celebrated. No, we're not perfect. And the bad exists out there, yes, but primarily it exists in here. And if we could teach our children to control the bad in here, no matter how hard it is, as Rabbi Steinsaltz is pointing out here, but to fight first and foremost the bad in here, then we wouldn't have the bad out there, because everyone would be a full master over himself. I mentioned this, I mean, I wrote about this last week, but you know, one of the great pieces of advice Rabbi Steinsaltz himself gave me was, when I was a teenager, he called me aside and he said, you should know the greatest enemy to Adin is Adin. The greatest enemy to Penny, pointing to me, is Penny. Once you've learned to master yourself, then you can master the world. We don't teach that. We teach about the environment and global warming. What about don't steal, don't commit adultery? What about that? No, we don't hear about that much. What about 10 Commandments? We don't hear about that. And that's unfortunate, but this is exactly what Rabbi Steinsaltz is saying here, and that's why he's making this. Any, yes, I'd love to hear your comments.
So Rabbi, I'm
going to say so.
Go ahead, Ellie.
No, go ahead. Okay, I'm just going to say that I did teach kindergarten for many, many years, and with my own children, feelings just are. And I always would say, if you have a feeling, probably someone else has had a similar feeling. It's what you do with the feeling. But acknowledging and validating, to me, with a child is important, because when they're little, they don't understand.
Right.
But the feeling comes.
I agree. The question exactly is what you do with that feeling. So once you bring it up, we say, oh, I feel for you. Oh, yes, yes. Or do we tell children, well, this feeling is negative. Let's do something about it. And you're right. That should be the conversation. If you are going to really speak about your feelings, then let's do something about that, not just speak about it.
Right. But my main point was that I don't want them to ever feel bad that they have the feeling. Talk about the feeling and process the feeling, and then we can deal with it and act and make a good choice. But the fact that the feeling is there, it just is there. We all have.
No, and the message has to be conveyed. That's right. That it doesn't make them bad, God forbid. It makes them human. It makes them have a good inclination, an evil inclination like everyone else. But I think if we don't make the point to them that they are feelings that are bad, and therefore we need to do something about them, then they'll get that message from someone else. And that message from someone else might just be a message where they are told that their feelings are them. And if they have bad feelings, they must be bad. And that's the worst message we can give them. So let's take control of that narrative and tell our children that they should recognize that they have bad feelings. It doesn't make them bad. But the question is what they do with them.
Correct. That's how I feel,
Rabbi, I was just going to say that I think one of the difficulties with education is children, whatever it is they're taught in school, they're taught in school. And then they come home to a home with parents and with siblings and with the whole culture of the home. And I think that there needs to be really good congruency between what is taught in a school, particularly when it's a psychological thing, like what are feelings and, you know, how do they manifest, and age appropriate things. You don't say the same thing to a 3-year-old that you would say to a 10-year-old. But the big gap for me is between the school and the home, and they're taught things and then they come home and there could be chaos around them. There could be all kinds of pathological or dysfunctional ways of dealing with feelings. If I could change the world in one small way, it would be when children go to kindergarten, parents also have to do a kindergarten.
Amen.
Right, beautiful.
Right. Beautiful.
I think it's interesting that we're all taught to judge. So, I mean, it's just a strange thing, but no matter what conversation, whether it's, boy, you shouldn't have worn that dress, or who does he think he is, or boy, he's talking too loud, it's always external because it's so much easier to judge somebody else than look inside.
Right. Yep.
And that's one of the things that I think that the American society judges more than maybe Europeans do, because they don't really care about how anybody else thinks or feels, or, you know, not necessarily not caring, but it's not as bothersome to them as it is to Americans. But I think our society actually rewards that judging. and there's movies based on people being mean to each other. It's awful what's showing on TV about this, and it's interesting how we are taught since we're very, very small to look outside and see what's bad about everybody else instead of what's good about everybody else.
Right. So I want to develop that, Vicky. So the question is, of course, why do we judge? And I think it stems, the root issue is exactly what we're speaking about. It stems from this idea that existence happens outside of us. And the bad happens outside of us, the good outside of us, and we're constantly facing outward. And really existence happens within. That's what Judaism teaches.
Mm-hmm.
You are what you're in, not are outside. Not what you are, not shaped by what happens outside, you're shaped by what happens inside. And instead of focusing on the other, focusing really on ourselves and our self-growth and our self-refinement, our self-return, on repentance, Teshuvah.
And yet that's what I'm sure that if you heard that somebody heard from God to go and sacrifice their son, and they were taking their son out someplace to kill them, your judgment on that person would not be so positive.
Right.
It's very interesting bringing up that example, because
It is.
if that's the case, then God has asked Abraham to go against one of the major 10 commandments. And that's something that I've never understood.
That's a good point.
Right.
Yeah.
That's a good question whether, you see, and the commentaries speak about this. Did he actually tell him to kill his son? Or did he tell him, because the word that is used, elevate your son, as an olah, as a sacrifice, which is called an elevation. So was he really asking to kill? Or maybe Abraham understood from the get-go that he wasn't going to kill him. And the proof is that at the end he didn't kill him. But he was wanting to see whether really he could turn his son into a type of living sacrifice, not dying sacrifice.
Did Abraham know that, really?
It's a good question.
Took him to the altar.
Depends on the commentary. I mean, Nachmanides thinks that yes. Rashi, no.
I think
Yeah.
one of the
Interesting.
I
Oh,
think one of the
Yeah.
important things there, Rabbi, is that
Yes.
I think one of the important things there, Rabbi, is that
Yes, Dan, yeah.
I think one of the important things there is that that's something that God was asking of Abraham. There was only one Abraham. There was only one person who was destined to become the seed of the Jewish people. I don't
Right.
believe that God is going to ask that of Pini or Adin or Dan
Right.
or Mark or whoever. That was an Abraham test.
Right.
I
Right.
don't know that that's a test that God asks each of us.
No, well said. Well said. And just like we each have a different purpose in life, we are also each given different challenges. Absolutely, you're right.
It goes back to that saying that you were talking about, that God doesn't ask each of us to be Moses.
Right.
God asks each of us to be the best Pini that there is, the best Dan that there is, the best
Right.
uncle that there is.
Right. Absolutely. That's right. Very good. And tailored to
Rabbi?
that are the challenges that he gives us. That's correct. Yeah. Yeah.
Rabbi,
Yes, Joy.
I'm thinking exactly what you just said before you said it, was that in essence, to take it literally is one way, but as we've been talking, I'm thinking about in the sense of that we all do have an Abraham inside of us, our kindness, and maybe we're being challenged all the time with that kindness, where God does place challenges before us. And do we maintain the faith that he is putting before us with all these enormous challenges? What do we do with it? Do we turn and kill and be angry? Or do we try to say, okay, God, you're asking something of us. I don't understand what it is, but I'm going to continue to follow what I've been taught and believe in a good way. And one of the things, just to dovetail on that, when we were just talking, is I was often asked to teach a class on anti-bullying. And I used to say, I don't teach anti-bullying. I teach about kindness, because kindness is the antidote. for bullying, kindness and compassion. So we used to go into the schools and teach compassion and kindness and tools of kindness as opposed, and they would say, oh, wow. And it was amazing how the children responded to the word kindness. It was as if they wanted to hear that as opposed to anti-bullying. It was like waiting to kind of bring out that sense of kindness. So anyway, I'm just thinking of the whole conversation, and it's really beautiful to be able to contemplate without answers, but just inner thoughts.
Right. Oh, very good. Going back to the binding of Isaac, it's interesting also to mention, and maybe in the same vein, and also maybe a little what Dan was saying, is that, you know, if we look deeper into the story in the Torah itself, God commands Abraham to go and find his son Isaac and sacrifice him, or elevate him. When he's about to sacrifice him, an angel comes and says to Abraham, stop, don't kill him. God doesn't want you to do that. What's interesting is that the commentaries immediately point out that if you are going, God forbid, to cause harm, then you have to make sure that you heard that from God himself. But if you are going to stop harm in the world, you don't need God to come and tell you. Even angels can tell you that. That you should do, even out of your own conviction. But if you, God forbid, are going to do anything that's opposite life in this world, then you have to have that message from God. God should be the one telling you. And in a way, I think it's connected to what we're saying. Number one, it's God telling Abraham. And no one, I think, had any type of revelation like that. I mean, maybe you did. I certainly never had God come and speak with me. So this indeed applies only to Abraham, not to anyone else. But secondly, what this means also is that we don't, for kindness to happen, we don't need to wait for God. That is already built within our hardware. God built it within our hardware, and he wants us to act upon what he built, what he created. Kindness is really one of the most important engines of the human beings, and in order for our car, you know, I don't know why I'm using that analogy, but for our car to function well, it needs to exercise its engine. It needs to ensure that the engine runs well, and kindness is right there. Barry, you wanted to say something before.
Well, having dealt with pure evil in the past, this is a conundrum for me because I really resonate to this, wanting to have kindness just flowing out of me all the time, but I've lost my trust in external people because I know evil exists. And so therefore, if you're not really careful and you're naive, for lack of a better word, you're very vulnerable, and so are the people around you who you are protecting. Yeah,
and I understand. And Barry, maybe you can tell everyone what you used to do, but really, I commend you for your holy work. And I know it could be draining on so many levels. Barry went after and also took care of many young children who were exploited sexually and in other ways. And really, Barry, you've saved many lives, and Hashem should bless you many times. And we know that you saw the worst evil that exists. But the fact that there is evil, that we recognize there's evil in the world. Whether people are born evil, we don't believe that people are born evil. They become evil. They become evil usually just like that crack that Rabbi Steinsaltz was demonstrating can create good. If we have a little crack for evil, eventually it could seep in and create canyons of evil too, which happens to some evil people in the world. Were they born like that? No. Evil does exist. But I think that the only response we find in Judaism, in a way, and that's what you did, Barry, to evil, is that when we witness evil, we can only respond with even more light and with even more goodness. The fact that evil happens should propel us to fight it with good. You know, the Lubavitch Rebbe would say that you don't expel darkness with a broom. You expel it with light. These people fight darkness with brooms. I recognize that. Politicians are very good at that. But that's not what God wants us to do.
Right.
Fight darkness with light. And what I mean by that is that we do even more good. We in a way take upon ourselves more mitzvahs. We spread a message of goodness to our neighbors, to our surroundings. And we change things that need to be changed so that goodness can indeed fill our hearts and our beings and become that canyon. But that's how we understand. Judaism teaches to fight evil. It can be very draining. It could be very, what's the word? It could fill us with despair when facing evil.
Mm-hmm.
But we have to respond with goodness.
Rabbi?
Yes, which I know you do, Barry, also. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, Donna, yeah.
Yeah, I've been sitting here debating whether to bring this up or not. It's a little probably past the scope of this, but it just so happens tomorrow I'm hosting a discussion group for one of my groups on criminal behavior and punishment.
Mm.
And some of the readings that I was reading have to do with sociological factors, neurological factors, and biological factors.
Mm-hmm.
And I've just been very interested in the brain. In fact, a half hour after this discussion ends, I've got a little something I'm watching on the brain that AARP, I guess, is doing. But I'd be really interested to know, what the Jewish perspective is on how you treat criminals. I mean, if somebody hurt somebody who I love, I mean, I would want to be, I wouldn't want to be very nice to them.
Mm-hmm.
But you have to think about, okay, their frontal lobes sometimes are damaged and they can't make judgments. They could have grown up, like you were just talking about, having been, beaten or abused by their parents. And there's just so many things to look into before you make a judgment on what's supposed to happen to someone.
Yeah.
Right. So I think it goes back to the exact same theme. And I'm glad you brought it up, because in a way, so when we face evil, we can, again, try to expel it with the broom, which means, what does that mean? It means that we try to fight it by going down to its level and fighting it. So yes, someone hurt, like to use your example, someone hurt that someone I love, I go and punch him in the face. Fine. And I feel good about it because I think that I fought evil. But that's what will that do? Eventually you went down to evil's level. It sucked you in. Mm-hmm. And it didn't really solve the problem. Mm-mm. And that's just one of thousands of examples, right? So what's the Jewish way of fighting evil? No, you don't go punch him in the face. You say, okay, evil happened. Yes, there's a reason why this evil happened, and maybe it's beyond me. Maybe educationally, this person was exploited, or again, socially was influenced negatively, and so on. But why it happened, I don't know. But the question of why, I don't think is a question that we address too much. The question we do address is, what can we do about it? And when we face evil, so fine, this evil happens. Maybe now it's time to spread a message of light, to spread a message of goodness, maybe with the same language. In other words, if someone did evil because he robbed a bank, maybe I should be teaching people how, how to give instead of how to take, how to, in a way, rob your bank to give to others, like your personal bank, your money to give to others. Maybe that's the message. And that's how you really fight evil with light. And I hope I'm being clear enough here. But, there's a verse in the book of Proverbs that says as follows, Al tan ksil beivlato pen tishvelo. By King Solomon, the wisest of men, who says, do not respond to a fool in his foolishness, lest you become equal to him.
That's right.
Now, what does that mean? It means that I can speak the evil person's language. Fine. but again, I'll become equal to him. We haven't done anything with the root problem. The root problem is that there's evil, and that evil needs to be fought with goodness and with light.
Yeah.
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 It's true.
But I think it goes back again to what we're speaking about, not to deviate too much from the theme. So let's reconnect it to Teshuvah, to repentance right here, and what he's speaking about. And that is that, you know, everyone has their own evil within. And the best way to fight that evil is in a way to maximize the light of your soul.
Mm-hmm.
I mentioned this, I think, I don't remember when, maybe in our last class, but again, one of Rabbi Steinsaltz's brilliant words of advice was saying to us, to his students one day, that there are two ways to read a specific verse from the book of Psalms. The verse says, Sur merava aseh tov, refrain from bad and do good. And he says one way is to say refrain from bad, refrain from bad, refrain from bad, refrain from bad, and do good. The other way is refrain from bad and do good, do good, do good, do good. He said, my way is to read this verse, refrain from bad and do good, do good, do good, do good. Refrain from bad, you have bad. Fine, you have bad inclinations, bad temptations. You got to refrain from that. But don't focus on that too much. If you focus on that too much, it will suck you in. So what should you do to fight it? Do good, do good, do good, do good. The more, again, you increase the flames of your soul, so to speak, the more that light will conquer the darkness. And that's the emphasis on do good, do good, do good, do good, do good. And in a way, this is what Rabbi Steinsaltz is saying. Yes, everyone has their own challenges. Everyone has their own evil or portion of evil to fight. But the best way also to fight it is to do good, do good, do good, do good, do good. And then that eventually that light will conquer the darkness. I think that in a way, it goes back to that idea that we are what we do. Speaking of this month of Elul, it's interesting to note also that, you know, we speak of this theme of Teshuvah during this month of Elul. One of the things that we are told to do is to shofar, to bring each and every day of this month. Now, and by the way, maybe we'll conclude the class with the blowing of the shofar too. We can fulfill this beautiful custom. The blowing of the shofar, in the book of Jewish law and in Maimonides and is explained to be a wake-up call, and blow it each and every day of this month, so that that voice of the shofar wakes us up to return. Hey, where are we in life? Are we in the direction that we want to be in? Is this really satisfying to us, what we're doing right now, where we are in general, spiritually, psychologically? That's the wake-up call of the shofar. But there's a deeper explanation to the shofar that returns to this idea of you are what you do. And eventually, aseh tov, do good, do good, do good, can expel the bad. And that is that the blowing of the shofar really comes from a horn of a kosher animal, some from deers, some from rams, some from antelopes. This one, I believe, comes from a ram, and we'll blow the shofar soon. But what's interesting to note is that, as the Kabbalists explain, the making of the shofar should remind us of how to act during this month. How do you make the shofar? You take the horn, but it's not enough. You actually have to shape it. You have to sand it. You have to take out the, whatever it's called, the marrow within. I don't exactly know what it's called. You actually have to build the shofar. And in a way, as the Kabbalists teach us, we blow the shofar to remind us that if we wish to create a pure voice that will sound from within, like the voice of the shofar that is so pure and innocent, we too have to work on ourselves, sand that being, sand that psyche, build it, shape it, form it, take out all the schmutz within. That's how you enable your voice eventually to emerge as the sweetest and purest voice of all. So it's the action, it's the aseh tov. Let's build more good. Let's shape the good in the world. Let's take out the garbage from this world. Let's do everything that the shofar reminds us to do. And that's how the voice of God then emerges with such purity. So that's another reason, again, a more Kabbalistic and mystical reason of why we blow the shofar, to remind us that just as this creates a beautiful voice because it was molded, in a lot of work was put in this, and it was molded in with focus on action, on doing what needs to be done. So too, a lot of our pure voice will emerge when we focus on action and do what needs to be done too, on aseh tov, aseh tov, aseh tov.
So, Rabbi, one of the things that you mentioned was, talking about the positive. And in diversity classes that I've taught, the subconscious does not understand the word no. So if I said, don't picture Elvis Presley, or don't think about your car right now, that's the first thing that comes into mind. So when you're saying don't, you're telling people to do it because the subconscious takes out the word not and puts it in. You tell your kids, don't lie, don't do this, you're putting those thoughts in their head. And it's interesting. So one of the things that I do at the class is I have them look around, and anybody can do this with people, but it has to be outside of your home. And since you know what you're looking for, it won't work for you. But if you ask them to look around in an area that they're not familiar with, and let me back up, pick out 2 significant colors that are in that area, and I'll just say blue and red. You ask them to look for something that's blue, and not to tell you, just look around, keep it to themselves, look all the way 360, close their eyes, and ask them what they saw that was red or green or whatever the other color is. 9 out of 10, and I will say probably 98% of the time, they saw nothing that was the other color, because that's all they're looking for. And our pictures are so strong, and our background, and we talked a little bit about, are we finding ourselves? Are we, what does that mean if we're trying to get to know yourself or finding yourself or whatever? And that's always driven me crazy, because we are who we are at this moment in time, and it's because of those filters. To me, we just need to understand that we're not seeing everything. And once we open our eyes to see it all, then it's a lot more beautiful.
That's beautifully said. Thank you, Vicky, for sharing that. Maybe I'll play that game with my kids later on today.
Oh, it works every time. Let me know. But
wonderful.
It's a wonderful thing to talk about, because when they look and see how dominant those other colors are, they're amazed that they didn't see them.
That's wonderful. Wonderful. But it reminds me, I think a lot of Judaism is based also on this idea. A lot of it is connotations. And we're very careful to really connote and make almost wire our brains, right? Like you're saying, so that it focuses on the positive, and it focuses on the good deed. And it focuses, even subtle messages. Just thinking of this, maybe because this is a class that focuses a lot on Kabbalah. But you know that the Kabbalists of Tzfat, if you've ever been to Tzfat, I'm sure many of you have been to Tzfat, the holy city of Tzfat in the northern part of Israel. But if you've been to Tzfat, you may have realized that many of the graves in the cemetery that's a few centuries old are painted in blue. And not just the graves, but many parts of the city are painted in blue. Why? Because the Kabbalists asked that, requested that. Kabbalists of Tzfat in the 1600s asked that the graves be painted in blue, and some parts of the city be painted in blue. Why? Because blue is the color of the heavens. And they thought that if the people would come to a grave and see the color blue, they would think of God, and they would think of the heavens. And that's why they wanted the color blue. So that's one of thousands of examples of how we try and really create those sites that would then wire our brains to think positively and to focus on positivity. I think a lot of the mitzvahs are like that too. Speaking of the color blue, the mitzvah of tzitzit, for example, initially was blue. Now we don't know exactly what blue color, so we have it as white. But why? Again, for the same reason, to think about the heavens. So then again, we wire our brain and we tell the story of heaven to our brains. So beautifully said. Thank you, Vicky. And I think that's in a way what we're speaking about, right? There's 2 ways to do Teshuvah. One to say, I'm going to fight bad, but then all you think of is bad, and then bad controls your mind. Or you can say, I'm going to do good. And that's the best way to create those cracks. And I think those are the best chances of having grand canyons of goodness in our lives and in our world, by allowing the waters of goodness to seep in. Very good. Any other comment, question, disagreement, whatever? Otherwise, we can continue with 1 or 2 more lines, and then I want to blow the shofar.
I wanted just to get back to where you started, Rabbi, with the idea that maybe one of the more profound ways that you let God in is not through the things which are easy for you, not through your strengths, but the things which are difficult for you and which are your weaknesses.
Right.
Whether it's the story of Abraham or whether it's, King David, was not the greatest Jew of all time. Moses, was. But here's David who sees Bathsheba and commits adultery and loses God's favor. And it's
right.
That actually opens the door after many years to his Teshuvah. That opens the door for him to be able to finally choser b'teshuvah in the deepest, profoundest sense, and only after horrible loss that comes about as a result of that thing. So that the thing that we think at a given point in time is the worst curse that could ever happen to us, if we shape it properly, it becomes the blessing.
Right.
That's a really good point.
Beautifully said. That's right, and I think that's a great advice, and I'll take it personally too. But I think to be as practical as possible, we should try and find one or two things, maybe just one thing in our life that is very hard for us to achieve. One thing that we know is negative, and let's try and work towards breaking that inclination and fixing that which needs to be fixed, rectifying that.
Right.
Really, and everyone has their own bad temptations. We recognize that. But maybe this is the time, really, and the time of Elul is an auspicious time for this, to work on those characteristics that need work, not those ones that don't need work. That's easy. But like Abraham, and like you mentioned now, like King David and so on. That's a wonderful idea. Thank you for sharing that, Dan. Shakar.
Thank you. Yeah, that was great.
Yeah. All right. Any other word? Okay, so what I want to do is proceed with the blowing of the shofar as we conclude this class. And I'm going to have maybe turn this into a semi-meditation, because as we blow the shofar, we have to be in tune not just with this sound, but with the sound of a year that the shofar is supposed to awaken. And the semi-meditation will, just before we blow, I just want to present it with an analogy from Rabbi Levi Tzchak Berditchev that we mentioned just before. Rabbi Levi Tzchak Berditchev speaks of a prince who lived his entire life in the palace of his parents. His parents were king and the queen. And at one point in his life, the age of 18, he said to his parents, look, I've had enough of the palace. Thank you for giving me the best childhood I could hope for, but it's time for me to go and see the world. His parents agreed, but with the condition that he doesn't forget who he is, and therefore he should retain his royal clothing. He should continue to speak royally with dignity, and all sorts of other conditions. The prince leaves the palace, and he sticks to his commitment for the first year, but after a year, he starts to dress normally like everyone else. And after a while, he starts to incorporate bad language in his own language, not royal anymore. And after a while, he loses this habit and that royal habit. And after many years now, 4 or 5 years, he has to go back to the palace. He goes back to the palace, but the security guards don't recognize him. He's transformed himself so much, negatively, of course, that they say, no, you're lying, you're not the prince. So he goes to a different entrance. And again, those security guards said, we're not going to let you in. You're not the prince. We would recognize you. And now he has nothing to do but to go and find a tree next to the palace and cry and cry and cry, saying, why did I become like that? I should have stuck to my commitment. I am a prince. I am royal. I should be royal in every way I could. And as he was crying, his cry was so loud that he awoke his parents. The king opens the window and he sees someone very familiar crying. So he comes out quickly out of the palace, and as he approaches him, he recognizes that it's his son. And his son sees his father, and they hug and they say to each other, the son says to his father, I'm terribly sorry. I didn't stick to my commitment, but will you please forgive me? I promise you that from this point, I'll act, behave, and be that ultimate prince that I only can be. And his father tells him, of course, I forgive you, come back into the palace, and the rest is history. But same year, Rabbi Levi Tzchak Berditchev, throughout the year, We may have forgotten that we are princes, we are princesses. And we took upon ourselves all sorts of terrible habits. And this cry of the prince is the cry of the shofar. It says to God, we're sorry. We should have remembered that we are princes and never acted in any other way. And when we shout with that cry and we voice it to God himself, then God comes out of his palace, so to speak, and hugs us and says, you know what? Don't worry, I forgive you and I'll bless you with the best year yet.